does God punish the Métis people, the 2025 floods in Imphal, and the cry for justice? In June 2025, Imphal Valley, the heart of Manipur, is drowning. Torrential monsoon rains have unleashed catastrophic floods, submerging homes, markets, and farmlands across districts like Imphal East, Imphal West, Thoubal, and Bishnupur. Over 19,000 people are affected, with 3,365 houses damaged and 47 landslides reported in the past 4 days. Relief camps have sprung up, but disease is spreading, supplies are dwindling, and despair is setting in. For many in the Kykl communities, who have endured 2 years of ethnic violence at the hands of Métis groups, these floods raise a haunting question. Is this divine retribution for the atrocities committed since May 2023? Does the innocent blood of the Kykl people cry out? And is God answering with water where fire once raged? This question is not merely theological. It is a moral and social challenge that demands reflection. The floods are not just a natural disaster. They occur in a land scarred by ethnic strife, where over 260 lives have been lost and 70,000 displaced since the conflict began. To explore whether divine punishment is at play, we must examine the suffering in Imphal, the history of violence, and the voices calling for justice, while remaining cautious not to oversimplify a complex tragedy. The floods, a valley submerged in crisis. The floods that began on June 1st, 2025, have brought Imphal to a standstill. The Imphal River breached its embankments near Kurai, flooding residential areas like Kurai Sajor Laikai and Kongpal. The Nambul River overflowed, inundating Singjame, Wangke, and Moirangkong. In Sagolband, families abandoned multi-story homes as water rose above windows. Thobal's markets and fish farms were swept away, and in Imphal West, areas like Kasampat and Uripak became canals of misery. A major hospital in Parampat was forced to relocate patients as floodwaters entered wards. The Army and Assam Rifles have rescued nearly 800 people, but relief efforts are stretched thin. The human toll is staggering. Over 19,000 residents are affected, with 31 relief camps established, primarily in Imphal East. Waterborne diseases like cholera and typhoid are emerging, exacerbated by shortages of food, fuel, and medicine. Blocked drainage systems and rising groundwater have trapped water in urban areas, turning Imphal into a lake of despair. For a region already reeling from ethnic conflict, the floods have compounded an existing humanitarian crisis, leaving thousands to grapple with loss and uncertainty. The ethnic conflict, a wound unhealed. To understand the question of divine retribution, we must revisit the ethnic violence that erupted in May 2023. The conflict was sparked by a court directive to consider granting scheduled tribe status to the Métis community, a move opposed by tribal groups, including the Kykl, who feared further marginalization. What began as protests in the hill districts escalated into a brutal ethnic war. Métis vigilante groups, such as Arambai Tengol and Métis Lipun, were accused of looting weapons from state armories and attacking Kykl villages. Homes, churches, and livelihoods were destroyed, and reports of assaults, sexual violence, and extrajudicial killings emerged. Over 260 people have been killed, 1,500 injured, and
야래 성 이비마디 야라가 야들에 알아 거기 바부지 속이 놈인가 아니 신기 타가나 아니 이제도 비례 너무 야래고
70,000 displaced, with the state effectively partitioned into Métis-dominated valleys and Kykl-dominated hills. The Kykl community has faced systemic violence, with allegations that state authorities protected Métis militant groups. The hills, where Kykl people reside, have become isolated, with residents in relief camps facing scarce medical care and inadequate aid. For many, the Imphal Valley, home to administrative offices, hospitals, and the airport, remains inaccessible due to ethnic divisions and buffer zones patrolled by security forces. In contrast, the Métis community has maintained that their demand for scheduled tribe status is legitimate and that their territorial integrity is non-negotiable. Métis organizations have rejected peace talks that propose separate administrations for the Kykl, insisting on a unified Manipur. Yet, the failure to address allegations of violence by Métis groups and the state's inaction against perpetrators have deepened the divide. Divine retribution or natural calamity. For some in the Kykl community, the 2025 floods are more than a meteorological event. They are a moral reckoning. Social media posts reflect this sentiment, with users suggesting that the floods are a consequence of Métis actions, framing them as divine judgment for the violence against Kykl women, children, and men. Others criticize Métis leaders for deflecting blame onto Kykl lands for environmental issues, pointing to poor drainage and governance in Imphal as the real culprits. Theological traditions across cultures offer frameworks for interpreting disasters as divine acts. In Christianity, prevalent among the Kykl, the Bible speaks of floods and plagues as judgments for unrepented sin, as seen in Noah's flood or the plagues of Egypt. In Hinduism, practiced by many Métis, karma suggests that actions have consequences, and societal imbalance can manifest in natural upheavals. The Métis Sanamahi tradition views nature as sacred, with disruptions signaling a breach in moral harmony. These perspectives fuel speculation that the floods are a response to the violence of 2023. However, attributing suffering to divine punishment is fraught with risks. Not all Métis participated in or endorsed the violence, and the floods have harmed innocent families, including children and the elderly. To label the suffering of thousands as retribution oversimplifies a complex tragedy and risks dehumanizing those affected. Natural disasters, while devastating, are often the result of environmental factors, such as heavy monsoon rains, poor urban planning, and climate change, rather than supernatural intervention. Social media discussions highlight environmental degradation in Imphal, such as illegal timber trade and riverbank encroachment, as contributing factors to the flooding, suggesting human negligence over divine wrath. The suffering in Imphal, a shared humanity. The floods have brought immense suffering to Imphal's residents, regardless of their role in the ethnic conflict. Families in Kurai and Singjame are trapped in their homes, with no access to food or clean water. Farmers in Kykl have lost crops and livestock, their livelihoods washed away. Hospitals are overwhelmed, with patients relocated amid rising floodwaters. The elderly and children are particularly vulnerable, facing hunger and disease in relief camps. Official visits to affected areas underscore the scale of the crisis, but the state's resources are strained and recovery seems distant. This suffering mirrors the pain endured by the Kykl in the hills, where thousands remain displaced in camps. There, access to healthcare is limited, and the fear of violence persists. The ethnic partition of Manipur has left both communities isolated, unable to cross into each other's territories for aid or reconciliation. The floods, while centered in the Métis-dominated valley, are a reminder that suffering does not discriminate. It binds all in a shared human struggle. Does innocent blood speak? The Kykl community's pain is undeniable. Reports of burned villages, looted homes, and targeted violence, often uninvestigated by authorities, have left deep scars. Accounts recount specific atrocities, such as the killing of an elderly Kykl woman during her morning prayers and the torture of individuals. These stories fuel the belief that the innocent blood of the Kykl cries out for justice, echoing the biblical story of Abel, whose blood called to God from the ground. Yet justice remains elusive. The imposition of President's rule in February 2025, following the resignation of the former chief minister, has not resolved the conflict. Peace talks facilitated in April 2025 have stalled, with Métis groups rejecting dialogue that entertains Kykl demands for a separate administration. The Kykl, in turn, have marked May 3, 2025, as a day of separation, reaffirming their call for political autonomy, a call for reflection and repentance. If the floods are not divine punishment, they are undeniably a wake-up call. For the Métis community, this is a moment to confront the past, not with denial, but with courage. Acknowledging the role of groups like Arambai and Métis Lipan in perpetrating violence is a first step. Demanding accountability, restoring trust with the Kykl, and addressing systemic failures in governance and media are essential for healing. Repentance in this context is not about public displays, but about honest self-examination and a commitment to justice. For the Kykl, compassion must accompany their demand for justice. The suffering in Imphal, while distinct from their own, is a reminder of shared humanity. Gloating over the floods risks perpetuating division, while offering aid, without compromising the call for accountability, could pave the way for reconciliation. Conclusion: a question in the waters. The 2025 floods in Imphal are a tragedy, not a verdict. They do not prove divine punishment, but they compel Manipur to face its moral failures. The cries of the Kykl, like the cries of Imphal's flood victims, demand to be heard, not as competing narratives, but as a collective call for truth. Whether through divine will or human neglect, the waters have spoken. A society that ignores its sins risks drowning in them. The Métis people, like all of Manipur, have a choice: to sink into denial or rise in humility. The path to redemption lies not in blaming the heavens, but in building a future where justice and compassion prevail. Let the floods awaken, not destroy. That's the end of the episode. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to subscribe Zelenga Media.